I stood in the corner of the boardroom, my heels sinking into the plush carpet, watching the men in their tailored suits laugh and clink their coffee mugs. The air smelled of expensive cologne and ambition, the kind that chokes you if you linger too long. My husband, David, sat at the head of the table, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile sharp as a blade. He was in his element, commanding the room with that effortless charm he'd honed over years of climbing the corporate ladder. I was there, as always, to support him, to be the silent partner who smiled and nodded, the woman who made him look like the perfect family man. But today, something felt different. There was a tightness in my chest, a warning I couldn't shake, like the first crack in a dam before it bursts. I'd spent 15 years building this life with David. 15 years of late nights, of sacrifices, of pouring my soul into his dreams. When we started, it was just the two of us in a cramped apartment, sketching business plans on napkins, dreaming of a company that would change the world. I was the one who stayed up until dawn, crunching numbers, drafting proposals, convincing investors to take a chance on us. David was the face, the voice, the one who sold the vision. But I was the architect. Every contract, every strategy, every dollar that flowed into Sterling Enterprises bore my fingerprints. Yet, somehow, I'd let myself fade into the background, content to be Mrs. Sterling, the supportive wife who hosted dinners and raised our daughter, Lily, while David took the spotlight. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation. Today was the annual shareholder meeting, the one where David would announce the company's record-breaking profits and unveil his vision for the next decade. I'd spent months preparing the financial reports, ensuring every detail was flawless. I stood by the window, half listening as David began his speech, his voice smooth and confident. "Gentlemen," he said, "Sterling Enterprises is at its peak because of bold leadership and unwavering dedication." I smiled to myself, proud of what we'd built together. Then he turned, his eyes skimming over me as if I were part of the furniture, and said, "And of course, I couldn't have done it without the support of my wife, who's here today. Just my wife." The room chuckled, a low, indulgent sound, as if he'd told a charming little joke. Just his wife. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and stinging. I felt my smile freeze, my hands tremble at my sides. Just his wife. As if I were nothing more than an accessory, a footnote in his story. The men in the room didn't notice the way my breath caught, the way my heart pounded with a fury I hadn't known I could feel. But David did. For a fleeting second, his eyes met mine, and I saw something there, guilt, maybe, or defiance. Then he looked away, continuing his speech as if nothing had happened. I don't know when the seed of revenge took root. Maybe it was in that moment, standing there in my carefully chosen dress, feeling invisible. Or maybe it had been growing for years, fed by every late night I'd spent alone, every time he'd dismissed my ideas in front of others, every time he'd taken credit for my work. I'd always told myself it didn't matter, that we were a team, that his success was mine. But those 3 words, just his wife, shattered that illusion. I wasn't just his wife. I was the one who'd built this empire, and I was done letting him pretend otherwise. I slipped out of the boardroom, my heels clicking against the marble floor of the hallway. My mind raced, piecing together a plan. I knew every secret of Sterling Enterprises, every deal, every loophole. I knew the truth about the company's ownership, the one David had conveniently forgotten. When we'd incorporated, I'd insisted on structuring the shares in my name to protect us from early risks. It was my money, my inheritance, that had funded the first office, the first hires. Legally, I owned 51% of the company. David had always known this, but we'd never spoken of it publicly. It was our unspoken agreement. He'd be the face, and I'd be the foundation. But foundations can crack, and I was ready to shake the ground beneath him. Back in my office, I pulled up the shareholder agreement on my laptop, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the pages. There it was, in black and white, my name, my signature, my control. I could walk back into that boardroom and drop the truth like a grenade. But I needed to be smart, not reckless. David wasn't just my husband. He was a master manipulator, a man who could talk his way out of anything. If I was going to do this, I needed allies, evidence, a moment when he couldn't spin the narrative. I needed to wait for the perfect opening, when his arrogance would be his undoing. That night, at home, David acted as if nothing had changed. He kissed my cheek, complimented the dinner I'd barely touched, and talked about the meeting as if I hadn't been there. "It went well, don't you think?" he said, pouring himself a glass of wine. I nodded, my face a mask, while inside, I was plotting. I thought of Lily, asleep upstairs, her innocent face so much like her father's. She was the reason I'd stayed silent for so long, the reason I'd swallowed my pride. But she was also the reason I couldn't let this go. I wanted her to see a mother who fought for herself, who refused to be erased. Over the next few days, I moved quietly, gathering my evidence. I contacted our lawyer, a man who'd known me since the company's inception, and confirmed the ownership details. I reached out to 2 board members I trusted, women who'd seen how David operated, who'd whispered their frustrations to me over coffee. They were hesitant at first, wary of crossing him, but I showed them the documents, the proof of my majority stake. "He's been lying to everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "It's time to set things right." They agreed to back me, their loyalty shifting like sand under my feet. I knew the moment would come at the next board meeting, scheduled for the following week. David was planning to announce a merger, one he'd pushed for without my input, one that would dilute my shares if I didn't act. I spent sleepless nights preparing, rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd stand, how I'd look him in the eye and reclaim what was mine. I wasn't just fighting for the company. I was fighting for myself, for the woman I'd been before I let him dim my light. The anger in me burned hot, but there was something else, to a flicker of hope, a belief that I could come out of this stronger. Oh, as the day of the meeting approached, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about rewriting the story I'd let David tell for too long. I looked at myself in the mirror, my reflection sharp and unfamiliar. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was Eleanor Sterling, the woman who'd built an empire, and I was ready to take it back. The morning of the board meeting dawned gray and heavy. The sky outside our penthouse windows thick with clouds that mirrored the storm brewing inside me. I moved through my routine with mechanical precision, choosing a charcoal suit that felt like armor, its sharp lines cutting against the softness I'd worn for years. David was already gone, leaving a note about an early breakfast with investors. He hadn't noticed the change in me, the way my silences had grown sharper, my smiles rarer. He didn't see the woman who was done playing the role he'd cast her in. I kissed Lily's forehead as she ate her cereal. Her chatter about school projects a fleeting anchor to the life I was fighting to protect. "Be strong today, Mommy," she said, her eyes bright with the innocence of a child who didn't yet know the weight of betrayal. I smiled, promising her I would, and left for the office with my heart pounding. Sterling Enterprises headquarters loomed like a glass monolith, its sleek facade hiding the battles fought within. I arrived early, slipping into my office to review my plan one last time. The shareholder agreement, the emails, the financial records, they were all there. A paper trail of my contributions, my ownership, my truth. I'd spent the week coordinating with my allies, ensuring they'd be in the room, ready to nod when I made my move. The boardroom was set up the same as always, a long mahogany table, leather chairs, a projector humming softly. But today felt like a battlefield, and I was ready to draw first blood. David entered the room at exactly 9 a.m. His presence commanding as always. He wore a navy suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile a weapon he wielded with ease. The board members greeted him warmly, their voices a chorus of admiration. I took my seat near the end of the table, my folder of documents resting in front of me, my face calm despite the fire in my veins. David began the meeting with his usual flair, outlining the merger proposal, painting a picture of growth and prosperity. He spoke of his vision, his company, as if I'd never existed. I listened, my hands folded, my heart a steady drumbeat of resolve. When he opened the floor for questions, I raised my hand. The room went quiet, a ripple of surprise passing through the faces around me. David's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded, his smile tight. "Eleanor," he said, his tone light but laced with something colder. I stood, my heels clicking as I moved to the front of the room, my folder in hand. "I'd like to clarify something before we proceed," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the murmurs. I opened the folder, pulling out the shareholder agreement, and held it up for all to see. "There's been a misunderstanding about the ownership of Sterling Enterprises." The room stilled, every eye on me. David's face froze, his smile faltering. I continued, my words deliberate, each one a step toward reclaiming what was mine. "When we founded this company, I invested my inheritance, my time, my expertise. The legal documents show that I hold a 51% stake in Sterling Enterprises. I am the majority owner." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle, watching the color drain from David's face. The board members shifted in their seats, their whispers rising like static. I placed the agreement on the projector, the screen lighting up with my signature, undeniable and bold. David tried to recover, his voice smooth but strained. "Eleanor, this is hardly the time," he began. But I cut him off, my tone sharp. "It's exactly the time. David, you've built a narrative where you're the sole architect of this company. But that's a lie. I've been silent too long, letting you take credit for my work. That ends today. I turned to the board, my allies nodding subtly, their support a quiet strength. The merger you're proposing would dilute my shares without my consent. As the majority owner, I'm vetoing it. The room erupted in murmurs, questions flying from every direction. David's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and fear. I saw it then, the moment he realized he'd underestimated me. The moment he saw the woman he'd dismissed as just his wife. But I wasn't done. I laid out the numbers, the deals I'd secured, the strategies I'd crafted. Each fact a brick in the wall I was building between his lies and the truth. The board listened, some shocked, others nodding as if they'd always suspected. My allies spoke up, confirming my contributions, their voices steady and sure. David tried to interrupt, his charm faltering as he grasped for control. This is a personal matter, he said, his voice rising. Eleanor's upset, but we can discuss this privately. I met his gaze, unflinching. This isn't personal, David. This is business. And it's my business. The words felt like a release, like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. The boardroom was no longer his stage. It was mine. As the meeting adjourned, the board members approached me, their questions cautious but respectful. David stormed out, his face a mask of fury. I stayed, answering every query, my voice steady, my heart racing with a strange mix of triumph and grief. I'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. David wasn't the type to surrender quietly, and I knew he'd come for me, in the office or at home. But I was ready. I'd spent too long in his shadow, and now I was stepping into the light. The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past like memories I couldn't quite grasp. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, replaying the boardroom scene in my mind. David's face, pale and taut, haunted Menet with guilt, but with a strange sense of finality. It crossed a line, and there was no going back. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark, save for the faint glow of the kitchen light. David was there, sitting at the counter, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up as I entered, but the air between us crackled with unspoken accusations. Eleanor, he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. What the hell was that? I set my purse down, my movements deliberate, buying time to steady myself. That, I said, meeting his gaze, was the truth. He laughed, a bitter sound that cut through the quiet. The truth. You humiliated me in front of the board, in front of everyone. You think you can just waltz in and take everything I've built. I felt the anger rise, hot and sharp, but I kept my voice even. You didn't build it alone, David. You know that. You've always known. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment, I thought he might cross the room, close the distance between us. But he stopped, his hands braced on the counter, his eyes searching mine for something I no longer had to give. You're my wife, he said, as if that explained everything, as if it could erase the years of dismissal. the casual cruelty of his words. "And you're my husband," I shot back. "But that doesn't mean I owe you my silence." The words hung between us, heavy and final, and I saw something shift in him, anger giving way to something darker, something desperate. He didn't speak again that night. He retreated to his study, the door slamming behind him, and I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty glass he'd left behind. I thought of Lily, asleep upstairs, and the weight of what I'd done settled over me. This wasn't just about me and David. It was about her, about the family we'd built, the life we'd promised her. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the fallout. But I knew the truth would reach her eventually. Kids always know when the ground beneath them shifts. The next morning, David was gone before I woke. A note on the fridge said he'd be at the office, handling damage control. I knew what that meant. He'd be spinning the narrative, rallying his allies, painting me as the unstable wife who'd overstepped. I didn't care. I had my own moves to make. I called my lawyer, Sarah, and asked her to prepare a contingency plan in case David tried to challenge my ownership legally. She was calm, professional, but I heard the excitement in her voice, seen David's arrogance firsthand, and was eager to see him brought down. "You've got everything you need," she said. "He can't touch you." I spent the day at the office, meeting with board members one-on-one, reinforcing my position. Some were skeptical, their loyalty to David rooted deep, but others listened, their eyes widening as I laid out the evidence of my contributions. I didn't beg or plead. I spoke with the authority of someone who'd earned her place. By the end of the day, I'd secured enough support to block any move David might make to undermine me. But I knew he wouldn't stop at the boardroom. David was a fighter, and he'd fight dirty if he had to. That evening, I found an email from him, sent to the entire board, proposing an emergency meeting to discuss recent disruptions. My name wasn't mentioned, but the implication was clear. He was framing me as a liability, a loose cannon who'd betrayed the company's interests. I forwarded the email to Sarah, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and determination. If he wanted a war, I'd give him one. But I wouldn't fight like him, with charm and manipulation. I'd fight with facts, with the truth I'd buried for too long. I went to Lily's room, needing to see her, to remind myself why I was doing this. She was curled up with a book, her hair falling over her face. "Mom," she said, looking up, "is everything okay?" I sat beside her, brushing her hair back, my throat tight. "It will be," I said, forcing a smile. "Sometimes, people make mistakes, and we have to fix them." She nodded, trusting me in a way that broke my heart. I didn't tell her about her father, about the cracks in our perfect life. Not yet. But I knew I'd have to, and the thought terrified me. As I left her room, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "We need to talk. Tonight." I stared at the words, my resolve hardening. He thought he could intimidate me, charm me back into submission. But I wasn't the woman he'd married, the one who'd smiled and nodded while he took her work and called it his own. I was someone new, someone who'd found her voice, and I wasn't going back. I typed a single word in reply, "Fine." Then I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began preparing for the fight of my life. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight as I waited for David in the living room. The house silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I'd chosen this space deliberately neutral ground. Not his study or my office, but the heart of our home, where we'd once planned our future over glasses of wine and laughter. Those memories felt like ghosts now, haunting the edges of my resolve. When David finally walked in, his tie loosened, his face drawn, I stood, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. He didn't sit, didn't look at me directly, just paced like a caged animal, his energy crackling with barely contained rage. "You've made a mess, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "Dangerous. You think you can just take everything and walk away clean." I didn't flinch, didn't let his words pierce me. "I'm not taking anything, David. I'm claiming what's mine." He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto mine, sharp and cold. "Yours. You think this company would be anything without me. I'm the one who closed the deals, who built the relationships. You were just," he caught himself. But the word hung in the air, unspoken but deafening, "wife." I smiled. A small, bitter thing. "Go ahead. Say it. Just your wife. That's what you think, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but his silence was answer enough. I stepped closer, my voice steady, each word a blade. "I built the foundation, David. Every contract, every strategy, every late night you took credit for, that was me. You may have been the face, but I was the brain. And I'm done letting you pretend otherwise." His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. But I didn't back down. I spent too long shrinking, too long letting his shadow swallow me. "Not anymore." He tried a different tack, his voice softening, the charm slipping back into place like a mask. "Eleanor, we're a team. We've always been a team. Let's fix this together. For Lily. For us." The mention of our daughter stung, but I saw through him. He wasn't pleading for our family. He was pleading for his empire, for the image he'd built on my back. "There's no fixing this," I said. "You made your choice when you called me just your wife. You made it every time you dismissed me, every time you took what was mine and called it yours." He laughed, a hollow sound. "You think the board will side with you. They know me, Eleanor. They trust me." I nodded, expecting this. "Some will. But I have the documents, the votes, the truth. And I have allies who see you for what you are." His face darkened, and for a moment, I saw something raw, something almost vulnerable. "You're tearing us apart," he said, his voice breaking. "You're tearing our family apart." The words hit hard, but I held my ground. "You did that, David. Not me." He left without another word, the door slamming behind him. I stood there, alone, the weight of our confrontation settling over me like ash. I wanted to believe I'd won, that I'd taken back my power. But all I felt was a hollow ache. I thought of Lily, of the life we'd built, and wondered if I was doing the right thing. Revenge felt righteous in the boardroom. But here, in the quiet of our home, felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, and let myself cry for the first time in years, not for David, but for the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed in him. The next day, I threw myself into work, fortifying my position. I met with Sarah, who drafted a motion to formalize my role as majority owner in the company's bylaws. "This will make it ironclad," she said, her eyes gleaming with approval. I nodded, signing the papers with a hand that no longer trembled. I reached out to more board members, sharing my vision for the company's future, one that didn't rely on David's charisma but on transparency, innovation, and fairness. Some were hesitant, loyal to David's charm, but others saw the strength in my plan, the clarity of my purpose. By midweek, David's emergency meeting was scheduled. I knew he'd use it to rally support, to paint me as the villain. I prepared meticulously, gathering every piece of evidence, every email, every contract that bore my name. I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, my voice growing stronger with each run-through. I wasn't just fighting for control. I was fighting for redemption, for the years I'd let myself be erased. But I couldn't shake the fear that this would cost me more than I was ready to pay. Lily's face flashed in my mind, her trust in me a fragile thing I couldn't bear to break. When the day of the meeting arrived, I walked into the boardroom with my head high, my folder thicker than before. David was already there, his smile tight, his eyes cold. The board members watched us, sensing the tension, the fault line running through the room. I took my seat, my heart steady, my resolve unbreakable. This was my moment, my chance to rewrite the story. And I was ready. The boardroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation as David stood to address the room. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of cadence that could sell ice to a glacier. He spoke of unity, of the company's legacy, of the need to move forward despite recent misunderstandings. He didn't mention my name, but every word was a jab, framing me as the disruptor, the ungrateful wife who'd betrayed him. I sat quietly, my hands folded over my folder, letting him dig his own grave. The board members listened, some nodding, others glancing at me, their expressions unreadable. I felt the weight of their scrutiny, but I didn't waver. I come too far to falter now. When David finished, he sat with a satisfied smile, as if he'd already won. The chairman, an older man with a penchant for fairness, turned to me. "Eleanor, you called for this meeting to be extended. The floor is yours." I stood, my movements deliberate, and walked to the front, my heels clicking like a metronome. I didn't look at David, didn't give him the satisfaction of my attention. Instead, I faced the board, my voice clear and steady. "Thank you for hearing me out. Today, I'm not here as David's wife. I'm here as the majority owner of Sterling Enterprises, and I have a vision for our future." I opened my folder, projecting the shareholder agreement again, the stark truth filling the screen. I walked them through the numbers, the deals I'd negotiated, the risks I'd taken when the company was just a dream. I didn't accuse David outright. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Each document a testament to my role, my ownership, my right to lead. I outlined my plan for the company's sustainable growth. Transparency, a board that valued every voice, not just the loudest one. The room was silent, save for the hum of the projector. as I laid out my case. Then came the questions. Sharp and probing. A loyalist of David's. A man with a gray beard and a permanent scowl. Challenged me. Why now, Eleanor? Why disrupt things when we're on the verge of a merger? I met his gaze. Unflinching. Because the truth matters. Because this company deserves leadership that acknowledges its roots. Not just its spotlight. Another board member, one of my allies, nodded subtly, her eyes encouraging me to keep going. I did, answering each question with precision, my confidence growing with every word. David couldn't stay silent. He stood, his voice sharp. This is a personal vendetta. Nothing more. Eleanor's upset, and she's using her shares to settle a score. The room tensed, but I was ready. If this were personal, David, I'd have stayed quiet, like I did for years. This is about justice, about giving credit where it's due. I turned to the board, my voice softening but firm. I've spent 15 years building this company, often in the shadows. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for what's mine. The vote came faster than I expected. The chairman called for a motion to recognize my majority ownership and grant me interim leadership until a formal restructuring could be finalized. My allies raised their hands first, followed by others, their faces a mix of respect and resignation. David's supporters hesitated, but the documents were undeniable, my argument unassailable. When the vote passed, 8-4, I felt a rush of triumph, tempered by the weight of what it meant. David's face was a mask of fury, his hands gripping the table as if to keep himself upright. As the meeting adjourned, the board members approached me, some offering congratulations, others cautious support. David didn't move, his eyes fixed on me, burning with a rage I'd never seen before. I met his gaze, not with anger, but with a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd won, but the victory felt hollow, a crown made of thorns. I left the boardroom, my steps steady, but my heart was a tangle of relief and dread. I'd reclaimed my place, but at what cost? That night, I sat with Lily, helping her with her homework, trying to anchor myself in the normalcy of our routine. She sensed something was wrong, her questions careful, her eyes searching mine. Is Dad okay? She asked, and I forced a smile, hating the lie but needing to protect her. He's just busy, sweetheart. We're figuring things out. She nodded, but I saw the worry in her face, and it cut deeper than David's betrayal. I knew I'd have to tell her the truth soon, to explain why her world was shifting. But not tonight. Tonight, I held her close, whispering promises I hoped I could keep. Back in my office, I found an email from David. Short and cold. This isn't over. I stared at the words, my resolve hardening. He was right, it wasn't over. But I was ready for whatever he threw at me. I'd spent too long being just his wife. Now, I was Eleanor Sterling, and I was done hiding. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, emails, and whispered conversations in the halls of Sterling Enterprises. I stepped into my new role as interim leader with a mix of determination and unease, aware of the eyes watching me, judging me. Some employees cheered my rise, their quiet nods and smiles a reminder of the work I'd done behind the scenes. Others, loyal to David, kept their distance, their skepticism a silent challenge. I didn't care about winning them over. I cared about proving I belonged. I spent hours restructuring teams, reviewing budgets, laying the groundwork for a company that valued substance over showmanship. David, meanwhile, was a ghost. He'd taken a leave of absence. His office dark, his presence erased from the daily grind. But I knew he wasn't gone. He was plotting, waiting for a chance to strike back. Sarah warned me he'd hired a lawyer, a shark known for dismantling corporate empires. "He's going to challenge your ownership," she said, her voice grim. "He'll claim you manipulated the records, that you coerced the board." I nodded, expecting this. David didn't lose gracefully. But I had the truth on my side, and I wasn't backing down. At home, the tension was a living thing, curling around every conversation, every glance. Lily sensed it, her questions growing sharper, her silences heavier. "Why isn't Dad here?" she asked one night, her voice small. I knelt beside her, my heart aching. "He's working through some things, sweetheart. But we're still a family." The words felt hollow, promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain why I'd fought. But she was too young to carry that weight. Instead, I read her a story, my voice steady, her warmth grounding me in a world that felt like it was slipping away. A week later, David's lawyer sent a letter, demanding a full audit of the company's records and questioning the validity of my shares. It was a calculated move, designed to sow doubt, to drag me through a public battle. I met with Sarah, poring over every document, ensuring our case was airtight. "He's bluffing," she said, but her eyes were worried. "He's counting on you folding under pressure." I smiled, a small, fierce thing. "He doesn't know me anymore." I threw myself into the fight, meeting with auditors, presenting evidence, countering every claim David's team threw at me. The board watched, their support wavering as the legal battle loomed. I knew I had to act fast, to solidify my position before David could turn the tide. I proposed a new initiative, a community outreach program that would fund local startups. A project I'd dreamed of for years but never had the power to push. The board approved it, their votes a quiet endorsement of my leadership. It was a small victory, but it felt like a step toward redemption, a way to make the company mine in spirit, not just on paper. One night, as I worked late, I found a note slipped under my office door. No signature, just a single line in David's handwriting. "You'll regret this." My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I tucked the note into my drawer, evidence of his desperation, and kept working. He wanted to scare me, to make me doubt myself. But I was done being afraid. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd let him take her voice, and I vowed never to be her again. Lily's school play was the next evening, a moment of normalcy in the chaos. I sat in the auditorium, watching her on stage, her face bright with pride. For those few hours, I wasn't the embattled owner of Sterling Enterprises. I was just her mom, clapping louder than anyone else. But when I got home, David was there, sitting in the living room, his eyes dark with purpose. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. I nodded, bracing myself. Then talk. He stood, closing the distance between us, his presence overwhelming. You think you've won, Eleanor, but you're destroying everything. The company, our family, Lily's future. His words were a knife, twisting in my guilt, but I held my ground. You destroyed it first, David. You built your empire on lies, and I'm done paying for them. He stared at me, his face a mask of frustration and something else, regret. Maybe, or the ghost of it. I never meant to hurt you, he said, softer now. I thought we were in this together. For a moment, I wanted to believe him, to see the man I'd loved, the one I'd built a life with. But that man was gone, buried under years of ambition and betrayal. We were, I said, my voice breaking. But you made me invisible, and I can't forgive that. He didn't answer, just turned and left, the door closing softly behind him. I stood there, alone, my heart heavy with the weight of what we'd lost. But I wasn't broken. I was still standing, still fighting, and I wasn't going to stop. The legal battle escalated faster than I'd expected. David's lawyer filed a motion to freeze my shares, claiming I'd misrepresented my ownership to seize control. The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was so quintessentially David, turning the truth into a weapon, twisting my strength into a flaw. I met with Sarah daily, building our defense, combing through years of records to prove every cent I'd invested, every decision I'd made. The auditors were thorough, their questions relentless, but I answered with the confidence of someone who'd lived the truth, not just told it. At the office, I pushed forward, refusing to let David's tactics paralyze me. I launched the community outreach program, hosting a press conference that drew local media and investors. I stood at the podium, my voice steady, outlining a vision for Sterling Enterprises that was mine alone, ethical, inclusive, grounded in the values I'd always held but never had the chance to champion. The applause was cautious but genuine, and for the first time, I felt like the company was truly mine, not just on paper but in spirit. But the personal toll was heavy. Lily was quieter now, her questions about her father more frequent, her trust in me fraying at the edges. One night, she found me in my office, staring at a photo of us from happier times. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" she asked, her voice trembling. I pulled her close, my heart breaking. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly. "But whatever happens, I'm here, and I love you." She nodded, but I saw the fear in her eyes, and it fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing her that truth mattered, that standing up for yourself was worth the cost. David's next move came in the form of a public interview, a calculated strike to sway opinion. He sat with a local journalist, his face somber, his words dripping with regret. "My wife's actions have been driven by personal grievances," he said, his voice heavy with feigned sorrow. "I've always valued her support, but this is a misunderstanding that's hurting our company and our family." The article spread like wildfire, painting me as the vengeful spouse, him as the wronged hero. I read it at my desk, my hands shaking, But I didn't let it break me. I called my PR team, crafting a response that was measured but firm, focusing on my contributions, my ownership, my vision. I didn't mention David. I didn't need to. The truth was my weapon now. The board called another meeting, this time to address the audit's findings. I walked in with Sarah at my side, my evidence stacked high, my heart pounding but my head clear. The auditors presented their report, confirming my 51% ownership beyond dispute. David's lawyer tried to spin it, arguing technicalities. But the board wasn't swayed. They voted to uphold my leadership. 9-3, a stronger margin than before. I saw David's face as the vote was announced, his mask slipping, revealing the raw desperation beneath. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or fear, just pity. He'd built his life on a lie, and now it was crumbling. After the meeting, I found him in the hallway, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. "You've won, Eleanor," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that what you wanted?" I looked at him, the man I'd loved, the man I'd fought for and against. "I wanted the truth," I said. "And I wanted you to see me." He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. I watched him go, my heart a tangle of grief and relief. I'd reclaimed my place, but the cost was a family fractured, a marriage in ruins. That night, I sat with Lily, finally telling her the truth in words she could understand. "Your dad and I made this company together," I said. But he forgot that I was part of it. I had to remind him, and everyone else, who I am. She listened, her eyes wide, and then hugged me tight. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she whispered, and those words were worth every battle, every tear. I held her, my anchor in the storm, and promised myself I'd rebuild not just the company, but our lives, piece by piece. As I tucked her into bed, my phone buzzed with an email from Sarah. The court had dismissed David's motion, affirming my ownership once and for all. I closed my laptop, a weight lifting from my shoulders. The fight wasn't over. David would always be a shadow, a reminder of what I'd overcome, but I was ready for whatever came next. I was Eleanor Sterling, and I was no longer just anyone's wife. The weeks after the court's ruling were a strange blend of victory and rebuilding. Sterling Enterprises buzzed with a new energy, my leadership setting a tone that was both firm and hopeful. I restructured the board, promoting my allies and bringing in fresh voices who shared my vision. The community outreach program gained traction, drawing praise from employees and investors alike. I walked through the office with my head high, no longer the shadow behind David's spotlight, but the woman at the helm, steering the company toward a future I believed in. David faded from the public eye, his absence a quiet admission of defeat. He moved out of the penthouse, leaving a note that said only, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if I believed him, but it didn't matter. Apologies couldn't undo the years of erasure, the betrayal of being reduced to just his wife. I focused on Lily, on creating a home that was ours, not a battleground. We spent evenings cooking together, laughing over burnt cookies, rebuilding the trust that had frayed in the chaos. She asked about her father sometimes, and I answered honestly, balancing truth with kindness. "He loves you," I told her. But he made mistakes. And we're all learning from them. The company thrived under my leadership. But the personal scars lingered. I saw them in the quiet moments. When I caught my reflection in the office windows. A woman who'd fought and won but carried the weight of a broken family. I started therapy. Not to fix what was broken. But to understand it. To forgive myself for the years I'd stayed silent. My therapist, a kind woman with sharp insights, helped me see that my anger wasn't just at David, it was at myself. For letting him dim my light. You're not just reclaiming the company, she said. You're reclaiming you. One day, an envelope arrived from David's lawyer, containing divorce papers. I stared at them, my heart heavy but not surprised. He'd included a letter, his handwriting shaky, unlike the confident scrawl I'd known. I didn't see you, Eleanor. Not the way I should have. I hope you find what you're looking for. I read it twice, then set it aside. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. I felt a quiet sorrow for the life we'd lost, but also a fierce pride in the woman I'd become. I signed the papers, my hand steady, and sent them back. It wasn't an end, but a beginning. Lily and I moved to a new house, smaller but brighter, with a garden where she could play and I could think. I invited my allies from the board over for dinner, a celebration of the new Sterling enterprises, but also of the bonds I'd forged in the fight. We laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged not as someone's wife, but as Eleanor, whole and enough. Months later, at the annual shareholder meeting, I stood at the podium, no longer the silent partner in the corner. I spoke of growth, of lessons learned, of a company that honored its roots and its people. The applause was thunderous, but it was Lily's smile from the front row that mattered most. She'd come to see her mother lead, and I saw in her eyes the strength I hoped to pass on. As I left the stage, a board member approached, one of David's former allies. You've changed things, Eleanor, he said, his tone grudging but sincere. You've made it better. I nodded, accepting the compliment. But my mind was elsewhere in the woman I'd been. The one who'd stood in this same room and heard herself called just his wife. She was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd fought for justice, for loyalty, for herself. That night, I sat in the garden, the stars bright above me, and thought of redemption. It wasn't about revenge anymore, or even about winning. It was about becoming whole, about building a life that was mine, not defined by someone else's story. I thought of David, wherever he was, and hoped he'd find his own path, his own truth. But that was his journey, not mine. Mine was here, with Lily, with the company, with the woman I'd fought to become. I closed my eyes, the night air cool against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt free.